So a lot of people know how the wind affects the disc, but not a lot of people know how to play in the wind. So like, how should you be throwing it? What you should be doing? What decisions should you make? And living in Kansas, like days like today are not uncommon. So I'm going to be talking to you about 3 tips that I have for you on playing better in the wind, but also just one thing that might be a little controversial to some. So let's talk about it. So the first tip I have for you is don't be a hero. What I mean by this is don't be just chucking it as hard as you can. So a lot of people see the wind and they think that you gotta fight the wind by throwing it harder, and that doesn't always help. It is more important to be throwing smooth and clean than to be throwing it hard. For example, with this T-bird, I can throw this and throw it clean and smooth, and it can hold into this wind, and it's like a 30-mile-per-hour headwind, 35-mile-per-hour headwind, and it can hold in that wind if I throw it clean and smooth and have good form. But as soon as I try and yank on it and just throw it as hard as I can, this disc has no chance. It's just gonna turn over and turn in the wind, and it's not gonna hold very well because I'm just not throwing it clean. And then same with this Wraith, this Halo Wraith. If I throw it clean, this just flies dead straight and it hooks up at the end. It throws pretty overstable. But if I yank on it and try and throw it as hard as I can, then it's gonna be turning over for me. And this is overstable enough that it's not gonna completely turn over in this wind, but it doesn't act as stable. And another thing when you're trying to just yank it really hard and throw it as hard as you can, not only can you throw it not clean, but you can also just throw it straight up into the air, and that's not good either. So even like my Firebird, I just try to throw it as hard as I can, and it's just went straight up in the air, out of control, went nowhere. And that's not helpful. Just remember, you're not trying to play and score as well as you would score when there's no wind. Your goal is to play about like 25% worse than what you would in normal wind, while everyone else is playing 50% worse than they would with no wind. And another benefit for throwing soft is playing in the wind like this is gonna be one of the most mentally exhausting things you're gonna do in disc golf. And so why are you trying to make it even more physically exhausting than it needs to be by throwing it like 100% off the tee every time? Slow it down, slow it clean. It's gonna fly better for you, and you're not gonna be as exhausted and frustrated when you do that. So play humble, throw clean, and you're gonna enjoy it a lot more. Then the second tip I have for you is to throw against the wind. Now what I mean by this is if you have a crosswind, so like this headwind is not a straight headwind, it's kind of like a right to left headwind. And when you're approaching, so say with my zone, since the wind's coming from right to left, you want the fade to be fighting against the wind. And so what I mean by that is if it's going from right to left, you want to be throwing forehand, because the forehand, the disc wants to go right when the wind's trying to push it left. And because of that, you get a straighter flight and you have more control over your disc. And not only that, when it does start fading, instead of lifting it up, the wind is just gonna knock it down to the ground. And so it's just gonna hit to the ground, get to the ground faster. And that's what you want. Because in this instance, with the right to left wind, if I throw it backhand, then as soon as it starts fading, the wind's gonna get under it, lift it up, take it left, and it's gonna be a lot further from the basket. And then the opposite's true when you have the opposite wind. So now if it's left to right wind, you should wanna be throwing it backhand for the same reasons. That backhand is gonna be fighting against the wind when it fades, and the wind's just gonna knock it down. Rather, when you forehand in that wind, as soon as it starts fading, the wind picks it up, takes it right, and it's gone. With the zone, it's not as affected as much just because it has no glide, but even the small little like 5-10 feet makes a big difference when you're putting, because you want to be as close as possible when you're putting in the winds like these, because it's a disaster. And then the third tip I have for you is you want to keep the disc low. Now, because you want to keep the disc low, because whenever you keep it low, it's less affected by the wind. Now, some people just might say, it's like, well, when I watch pros, it looks like they're throwing it like a normal height. So what do you mean? And yes, it looks like they're throwing it normal height, but that's because they're throwing it low. When you throw it low, the wind is gonna be still picking it up, but it's gonna fly like a normal height. But when you throw it at a normal height, like you would, the wind is just gonna pick it up, carry it, and you lose, as soon as you get the disc up high like that, you lose all kinds of control with that disc. So you wanna keep it low, keep it clean, and throw the fade against the wind. Now, my one thing that's a little controversial, I just see a lot of players just throwing too overstable of discs in the wind. So a lot of people, they see, okay, I've got a straight shot, I've got a headwind, it's 35-mile-per-hour headwind, I've got to throw a Firebird or a tilt or like a Lucid X Enforcer, all of that, which, yes, if you throw those, they won't turn, especially a tilt, that thing. I still don't think a tilt is necessary even in 45-mile-an-hour winds, but that's another thing. Anyways, yes, those won't turn it all for you, but other discs can do that, and what you gain is not as much of a finish at the end. So like for this hole, yes, there's like a 35-mile-per-hour headwind, so you could throw a Glow Firebird like I have, and it's not gonna turn for you, and it's gonna throw it low, it's gonna fade, and it's gonna do exactly what you want, right? Well, this one, it goes too far left. It doesn't land softly, it skips way far, and it gets out of control. Which, if you want that, that's great, then keep doing that. But if you throw a T-Bird, if you throw it smooth and clean, you slow it down, and you still throw it in a little bit of hyzer, this can hold, and not only that, but when it fades, it's gonna land softer. You're gonna have more control over that landing than if you threw a Firebird. This could be helpful if you have like a tunnel, or like in this case, you have that whole left side being trees, and so you want something that fights the wind, but you don't want to go too far left, because even my Wraith, when I threw that, you can see it skipped over and went way far left. Throwing something a little bit straighter that can still hold, like a T-Bird, that's why I love T-Birds, it'll just hold straight and finish soft and just have more control over where you're landing. So. And not only is a T-Bird gonna give you that softer landing, but you can actually control your lines a lot better and just control the whole flight a lot better than with like a Firebird or a really overstable Wraith, Lucid Enforcer, just tilt, whatever it is. When those fairways are tighter, you wanna throw a straighter disc that's still not gonna turn. Like this is still an overstable T-Bird, but it doesn't have the finish of that overstable Firebird. And I can talk to you a lot more about angles and controlling your angles and the benefits of that, but that's another video for another time. But thanks so much for watching. See you in the next one.